the Bible back on a glorious day in my favorite sweater. And today we're going to talk about Moses, chapter 4, Moses on deck. Um, Real quick, I'm not going to go over the whole story of Moses by now. Pretty much you don't get out of preschool or Sunday school without hearing about Moses, Um, yeah, there's books and all this other kind of stuff written on him, but just to kind of gloss over his story real quick, obviously Moses was an Israelite. Um, during this time when he was born or whatever, I guess I'll go into a little bit more, but the Pharaoh, tried to kill all the babies up to like two or whatever, and he was sent down the river. Pharaoh's daughter swooped him up. He was raised, in the Egyptian thing. He finally gets older, starts to realize his calling, saves a Israelite dude. Um, you know, Leaves, comes back, frees the people, parting waters, promised land, 40 years in the desert. That was probably the worst representation of Moses' life ever given, but you get the idea. I want to just kind of jump into this thing, and the first section I want to go into is the fam. As you already know, in Exodus 2, 1 through 10, it talks about, his infancy and everything like that. And, I kind of went over this just a couple seconds ago, but, during this time, the Bible records that Pharaoh was, unhappy or whatever with the Israelites, or it was a Pharaoh that came about that didn't know Joseph or knew not Joseph, whoever Joseph, he didn't know who Joseph was. So, didn't like the Israelites, political stuff, and decided to kill off all the Israelite firstborn or, babies, all the Israelite babies up to the male babies up to like two or whatever. And Moses just being born, his parents got worried for him. They put him in a basket, sent him down the river. Pharaoh's daughter picked him up, and this is kind of where the story gets interesting, because from here, um, the Pharaoh's daughter sends for someone to nurse the baby because it's not her baby. She's not prepared to give the baby milk, so the baby still needs to be nursed. So she sends one of her servants to go get somebody to nurse the baby. Well, that person ends up being Moses' mother. It's kind of crazy how that turns out. And one thing to note here is that, it would make no sense for someone to send their kid down the river to escape persecution, and then that person who's supposed to give this child safety gives him back to the mother or the family or whatever. I mean, the persecution is still going on. Why are you going to give the baby back? There has to be something different here, something different about these circumstances. And what we do know is that the Egyptians were black. That's what the Bible says. That's what history says. Um, and that's what we know. And along these lines, if the Israelites looked anything like anything different from what the Egyptians would have looked like, then it would be a lot easier to kind of spot and um, wipe out. I'm thinking that, my theory, I know I'm kind of jumbling here, but my theory along this thing is that, it's almost like, if we think about the Jews, the modern day Jews, and World War II, where pretty much they looked all the same, but there was some kind of mark, or there was some kind of clothing, there was some kind of distinct thing that they wore or did that kind of distinguished the two people. There's a little bit of history on that when we look at tassels or whatever, but kind of getting back to the point, I'm thinking that, you know, she sends Moses back to her mother or whatever for nursing, and during those time they just kind of pass themselves off as Egyptians, which is a lot easier to do if everybody looks alike. I guess I did a lot of talking around one point, but that's pretty much what that is. There's a little bit more on there in the book, but I don't want to get too deep into that. Um, The next section I want to go into is a growing boy. In this section, at this stage of Moses' life, we kind of learn that he grows up as an Egyptian. There are several places in the Bible where they say, he's learned in all the ways of the Egyptians, or pretty much he knows everything that the Egyptians know. And it also says that, he spent his first 40 years, living under the Pharaoh as an Egyptian and all this other stuff. So let's think about this. We know that the Egyptians were black. We know that the Pharaohs were dark skinned. We know this. We know that they were African. You're telling me that if he looked anything other than black, he just kind of just skated by for 40 years from a baby to a grown man, and no suspicions were raised, nothing, right? The easiest way to kind of just cut through this is just to say, hey, well, he looked like everybody else. He was easily accepted as Pharaoh's daughter, and that's the way it goes. That's just the easiest explanation that kind of cuts through it. The next section to go over is saved by an Egyptian. Pretty much when Moses, uh, he's when he saves an Israelite or whatever, and he runs away from Egypt or whatever, he goes into the desert, and there's these women that go to the well, and they get harassed, and by harassed by men, just doing what men do. And this time Moses comes along and he chases them off, and they invite him back to the house or whatever, and Pops is there. He's like, you guys are normally back a lot later. You guys are normally harassed. Why are you guys back so soon? And they told their dad that that they were saved by an Egyptian. Obviously to this point, we know that Moses is an Israelite. We know that he's not quote unquote Egyptian, but yet they still say, well, we were saved by an Egyptian. Why would that be? I mean, obviously we could see that they all look alike. They couldn't tell the difference, just like the Canaanites couldn't tell the difference. These people couldn't tell the difference either. The next section I want to go into is the second sign. Pretty much 40 years later, this is where he runs into the burning bush. God tells him, you're going to be the one to save the people. And he's like, okay, or whatever. He's still kind of skittish about it. So God gives him some signs. The first sign is when, he like drops the staff or whatever, and it becomes a snake, and then it turns back into his staff or whatever. The second sign is, he was to put his hand, I believe, inside of his clothing, his garment, to his chest or whatever. And when he pulled it out, the Bible says that it was leprous or white as snow. And obviously he's freaking out. So God tells him to do it again, and when he does it again, I'm reading from the book here, it says that his hand was turned as his other flesh. Think about that for a second. If he was already white, even if he was already olive skinned or light skinned or whatever, being leprous wouldn't be that bad. I mean, it'd be maybe a little lighter tone than what he already is. But if you are a black person, if you are a dark skinned individual, I mean, even, darker than me, even I'd freak out. But if I just, and all of a sudden, boom, would look like the pages on this book or whatever, and like, I'd freak out, you know. And I guess a reason why that, he freaks out, and I guess we'll see a little bit later, is because, leprosy. Oh man, we're gonna get into it. We'll just get on to Miriam's curse. But from that, just kind of understand that, in order to get that reaction, you'd have to be dark. You'd have to be an African to really get that leprous uh, response, and it's just like, ah. But, going on to the next section, which is Miriam's curse. At this time, they're out of Egypt or whatever, and Moses marries a Cushite woman, Ethiopian woman. Obviously, he's married a black woman, and Miriam doesn't like it. Not that she's black or whatever, because they're all black, as I'm gonna continue to point out, but because she's not one of us, if that makes sense. Um, and so, a lot of bickering or whatever. God finally gets involved, and I'm just gonna kind of read. I'm just gonna kind of read from the book right here. From the There we go. God pretty much turned Miriam. He gave her a bout of leprosy, and it says here, um, she was turned white, and one translation even says describes her as a stillborn baby already decayed at birth. So we could see that the I guess I'm kind of spilling into leprosy here too, and what they kind of feel that it already is. But leprosy is mainly the changing of the skin. It's albinism. I mean, I guess there's so many different interpretations or whatever about it, but and we'll get into a little bit later. But what we can see is that pretty much her skin was black, it turned white, and that freaked her out, you know, and God pretty much did the same thing um with Moses as he did with her. But this kind of gets on to leprosy, and I know I have a lot of there's a lot of um, references and everything in here that I'm not really gonna go over, but pretty much, a lot of people say that leprosy is, some type of like skin disease, or some type of uh, something that's I'll say deadly or dangerous or whatever. And as far as my research goes, I say that leprosy is really just albinism. It's just when your skin, and this happens to every race, even there's even white albinos, but when your skin just loses pigment, it just turns white. And the reason why I say that is this is because for the people that say, well, leprosy is really this kind of disease, or it's a skin disorder, or it's something that's deadly, it's not. Because even at this point in time, they could uh, figure out the difference between different things. That in the Bible they talk about different skin diseases. They talk about rashes. They talk about boils. They talk about people dying from skin diseases. They talk about this stuff over and over and over, you know, and none of those times none of those times is, the rashes or the boils or whatever, is that related to leprosy. They knew leprosy as something else, and even then, when we look at the Canaanites, we know that they are a light-skinned people that we're going to get into a little bit later on, but we know them as a light-skinned people, white people. They were, for the most part, healthy. They engaged in some nasty stuff, but other than that, they were healthy. Like, their skin didn't dictate their health. And then there's another um, example, and I guess I'll try to find it, but I think it's in Isaiah, one of the letter, Gehazi. Yes, that's his name, Gehazi. Pretty much, there was this general who had leprosy, and he was known as a mighty general. He conquered and all this other kind of stuff. And if leprosy was really this debilitating disease, then it would incapacitate somebody to where they couldn't fight. And even then, it's not like he was just some soldier. Um this dude became like a general. Like, this dude became a high ranking officer. And even then, this is where we get into Gehazi, who kind of did some shady stuff, and now all of his descendants get leprosy. But even then, like, just because you have leprosy doesn't mean that you die or whatever. And yes, there were instances where, if you were a leper or whatever, people, distanced, excuse me, themselves from you or whatever, is because it was weird, right? I mean, let's just be honest. Like, it was just weird, and this was a superstitious, classic people. Like, this is what they, I don't, what's wrong with you? Just stay over there, you know? And even then, there are other skin diseases that do turn your skin white and can be contagious, and that can bring the boils and can bring all that stuff, right? It can. But that's not leprosy, because you could still be a healthy person, and you could still be a healthy person in the biblical sense, right? And still, just be albino, and still do your job, do whatever you got to do. The next section I want to talk about is Canaan's curse, right? This is where we start to talk about pretty much white people in the region. The first verse I want to go into is um, is in Leviticus, I believe, 14:33 through 34, and the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, when ye be come into the land of Canaan, I will give you, which I give you for a possession, and I will put the plague of leprosy in a house in a land of your possession. So pretty much what he's saying is, once you get to Canaan, I'm going to give these people leprosy, you know. I guess maybe to distinguish themselves from each other, whatever reason, whatever you want to debate, whatever you think about that, doesn't really matter. But I guess as far as God is concerned or whatever, as soon as they get there, the people that are already there get leprosy. So black people turn white or whatever. That's biblical mythology. That's what that is. Another thing to take note of is that part of the curse of Canaan was that and was that he would have the descendants of Japheth, with pretty much white folks, the descendants of Japheth dwell in the tents of Canaan. So pretty much that means that, curse be Canaan, you're gonna lose all your land to white folks. Pretty much, you're gonna lose all your land to them. So now, when we see, white folks in the region, or we see people that are at this kind of particular point non-black or whatever, what we're looking at, I guess from a biblical perspective, is people who, um, combination of two things: leprosy and people from the house of Japheth. So pretty much now we're starting to see where the white folks come in, and we're starting to see earlier in the in a presentation, when it was kind of pointed out that the Canaanites were in fact white. So that should kind of separate a lot of the confusion or whatever. The next section I want to go into is lit up. Pretty much everybody knows Moses as the bearer of the illustrious Ten Commandments. So pretty much what happens is, he goes up the first time, gets these commandments, put them on a tablet, comes back down the mountain, doop doop doop, sees everybody worshiping an idol, and he gets mad, breaks them, throws a little temper tantrum, goes back up, pretty much sees God. The Bible says that he gets lit up or whatever. He has to put a veil on his face, and he comes down, gets the tablets, all that other good stuff, yada yada yada. Um, Now, some people might take this face lit up thing to the extreme, and pretty much try to say that, well, see, his face was lit up, so that must mean that he got lighter, you know. And to those people, I say, well, okay, if you want to go that route, then we can go that route, but uh, you have to be willing to admit that if his face lit up, as in it went from dark to light, then he spent over 80 years of his life being a dark skinned man, being of African descent, and he just changed light, which takes away absolutely nothing from anything that this book is saying, and takes away absolutely nothing from what I'm saying now. he was still essentially a person of African descent and just got lighter as pretty much, you know, humanity. So that's not that big a deal. But even then, um, when we talk about being in the presence of God and how God is like a fire or a sun or a blaze or whatever, anything like that, um, it's actually quite the opposite of what you may expect. Like people go and get tans, right? People want to get darker. People want to get that healthy glow. That's not me doing any propaganda. That's just marketing. Get a healthy glow, get a tan, go get, so if he was, if anything, seeing the face of God, right, who is, known in not just the Bible, but in I say every culture, besides a lot of the ancient European cultures, is known as, the sun. Then, if anything, he came back darker. But even then, on the whole, I think that like this whole kind of thing is really, I don't want to say petty, but it's just one of those things that I feel needs to be addressed. um but at the end of the day, Moses's ethnicity, as far as just the biblical texts and everything that's been presented is concerned, isn't up for question. We know he's black. We know the Israelites at this point are black. There, it just is what it is. So with that, I hope you learned a little something. We're going to go on to the next one, which is chapter 5, quotables from other notables. This is where we're going to get into a lot of other Old Testament characters and, kind of just, go on from there. So with that, enjoy your day. Come back for the next one. This is Raday. Stand to reason. Blacks in the Bible. Gotta plug everything. Twitter, Facebook, everything. Just Raday. And I'm out.